Hello and welcome to the Snowflake session on exception handling. Before we move on to this topic, let's understand what an error is. Suppose you are running a stored procedure and it fails. Now, the reason of the failure could be some problem with your code or data that you are processing through the stored procedure. The next step for you would be to go and investigate this code to find out what went wrong. Now, it could be a painstaking task to go and investigate your code, especially if it is huge in size. And that's when Snowflake exception handling could be helpful. With Snowflake exception handling, you can log the erroneous data in your log tables, and this data can then be investigated and it can be used to fix the errors to prevent them from happening in future. So let's get started. Here I'm creating a simple procedure that will take customer ID, first name, last name, age, and gender as input parameters to load data into a customer table by running an insert statement. Now in the declare section, I'm declaring my exception. So the syntax is first the exception name, then the exception keyword, then you'll have the error code. So in Snowflake, this error code can range between minus 20,000 and minus 20,999. And then comes your error message. So I've created two exceptions over here. The first name, the first exception allows you to have only alphabetic character in first name, and the next exception allows you to have age to be entered in a very specific range. Now if the first name contains any non-alphabetic character, or if the age is not between 0 and 110, then the exception is raised. So the raise command followed by the exception name actually raises the exception. Now let's run this store procedure. So let me create the procedure first. The procedure has now been created successfully. Now let's first run the store procedure using all the valid values. And let's go and see if the record is indeed getting inserted in the table. The procedure has now completed successfully. Now let's run this select statement on the customer table. Here you can see that the record has now been inserted. Now let's run this procedure again with the invalid age, which is minus 30. Here you can see that the error message has been popped up. You can see the error code that we have earlier defined for age exception, and age not in valid range was our error message, which you can see now here. Now, so far so good. You are able to now declare an exception and also raise it when certain conditions are met. But this is not entirely helpful because you have not yet logged any error messages. So let's move on to the next procedure in which we are going to log the erroneous data in our log tables. So moving on to the next procedure, we have declared the same exceptions here. You can see the two exceptions are defined, and I got the same if condition over here, which will check for the valid values for the first name and age. And the next statement inserts the data into the customer table. In the very last, we have got this exception clause where we are checking for each of these exceptions, and when certain exception is occurred, it will run the statements written inside that when clause. So when first name last name exception occurs, then it will insert this record into the table and it will return a -1 value. And similarly for age exception as well, I'm running the insert statement, and when none of these exception occurs, then the processing will come to this line and it will insert the data into the log table. Now let's create this procedure. Procedure has been created. Now let's try to run a procedure with the incorrect age. Now you'll see that the procedure has returned -1 value. Now let's go and check the log table. Here you can see that the ID2 has been inserted into the log table, which belongs to this record, which we have passed as a parameter. And you can see the SQL code and error message are appropriately inserted into this table. Now, the next step for your development team would be to go and investigate this data and go to the source and check if if there was really any age which was not in the valid range, and fix it at your source side. So that's how we can use this exception handling to minimize your code analysis work. The next thing is Snowflake also has their inbuilt exception handling statements. So there are two different exception handling mechanisms. One is called as statement error, another is called as expression error. So this is just for your information. We are not going to implement this in any way, but this is how internally Snowflake handles the exceptions. So let's look at these two examples one by one. So let's first look at the exception error. Suppose you have got this age variable, which is a number, and if you are trying to insert this string into the age variable, which is a number, so this means that it's not going to work. It's going to throw an error. And what Snowflake calls these kinds of errors as expression errors. Let's go and create this procedure. Procedure has been created. Now let's run this procedure. Remember that I have provided all these values as input to the procedure, but we are not going to use them. We are just going to assign age to a string 20. So let's run this. Now you can see that the Snowflake has thrown an exception error. Now the other type of error is statement error. So let me just comment this for now and uncomment the insert statement. So whenever you are performing any kinds of inserts into a table, and let's say you're trying to insert a string into a number field, or if you're trying to selecting data from a table which doesn't exist, or if you try to drop a table that doesn't exist, then Snowflake throws the statement error. Now let's recreate this procedure and run it. You'll now see that it has thrown the statement error. So there are these two different types of error messages or error exception handling ways that Snowflake employs. So one is statement error, another one is exception error. This is just for your information. And that's all about this today's lesson. I hope you have learned about exception handling and how to handle an exception. Thanks for watching.